African, and I can speak for people from the Deep South, I realized with time that we were actually we're so African but we have no idea about it. The way we eat, the way we bury, the way we marry, the way we, the first time I went to Soweto, I went to 3 homes on the first day that I went to Soweto. This was 1995. And all 3 of those homes, people said, sit down and you're gonna eat something, right? And I was like, this is like being at home. So I just give that bit of context to talk about, so Phil mentioned Ubuntu. And if you know the last Boston Celtics team that won the championship when you had the big 3 in Boston, it was Kevin Garnett, Ray Allen, and Paul Pierce. Well, there was a young man, he's actually Congolese, but he came to South Africa as a boy. And he was a basketball player. And he had lived here for many years. He was brought over to Boston to get some experience as a coach. And he sat with Doc Rivers and he explained what Ubuntu meant. And if you look back at that championship run that the Boston Celtics made, their last championship run, after every huddle, if you go in the behind the scenes footage, the entire team, although sometimes they would butcher the name, Ubuntu, but they would scream Ubuntu. And they came to sort of embrace that understanding that we are, I am because you are. And as a sports team, it propelled them. It's one of the things they speak about in their documentaries is that just the understanding of Ubuntu propelled them, brought them together in ways that they hadn't really looked at each other before. And they went on to win the NBA championship. And I think, so just in terms of the NBA, what we're known as NBA Africa. So we are the African arm of the National Basketball Association. Started coming here David Stern came here before I came. So in the late 80s, 1987, 88, he came with Dikembe Mutombo, Alonzo Mourning. And at that time, Dikembe was sort of pushing NBA to try and explore Africa. So they came, saw South Africa, and just did a tour and went back. They came back in the mid-90s, and they met Mandela, and they started to sort of see that at that stage, Hakeem Olajuwon was one of the best players in the world. He had come from Nigeria, never played as a young man. He only started playing when he was like 16. And then they started to look, and in 2010, the NBA opened an office in Africa, in Johannesburg. And to the NBA's credit, one of the first things that we did was we hired a Senegalese gentleman who was a product of basketball, had gone to school in the States, was working for a team, came over and said, okay, you start the office. So we started the office here because it was a hub. World Cup was coming here. This is where the finances were perceived to be. And so the great thing was that the NBA recognized that you have to have Africans to take you into Africa, because on so many occasions, we've used Americans to try and take us into certain environments. And for some reason, with the power of the brand, the money, it doesn't work. And I think our example has been one where we brought Africans in to bring the NBA onto the continent. But if I have to be honest, in South Africa, it's only recently that we started hiring quite a number of South Africans to help us with the business. And there's no coincidence that although we've had success, and especially outside of South Africa, we're starting to have more success in South Africa because we have South Africans that are kind of taking us down this path to help us understand cultures. Another way that we are embracing culture and language and understanding that there's no other way for us to succeed without acknowledging this and embracing it is that as we expand onto the continent, so we've opened an office in Senegal, we've opened an office in Nigeria, we're in the process of opening an office in the next few weeks, literally in Cairo, Egypt, and the next one will be in Nairobi, Kenya. And our CEO has said unequivocally, we have to have individuals from those countries that will lead and lead our development in those countries because of all the nuances, the things that you miss. And one of the things as an American, having grown up in the United States, that I see all the time with the NBA, and it has gotten better, but literally we've had to fight tooth and nail because a lot of the times you're sitting in New York, you have these ideas that have worked, you have the power of this brand, maybe you're funding the initiative, and you're like, this is the way we're gonna do it. And we have to fight back and say, look, it's not gonna work. If we don't acknowledge the way that things are done here, we're going to crash. And we've had a number of examples where that has happened. And so I think, one of the things I have 2 sons, and when I moved to South Africa in the 90s, what became more evident to me when I talk about language, and I say this all the time and I get different responses, but I think that Americans, our biggest handicap, which I came to believe and understand when I moved overseas, is language. We grow up, and many English, or even South Africans will say that Americans, we don't even really speak real English. So we speak American. I know you're not laughing, but many of you have said this. I know, it's okay. But it's one of our biggest handicaps because we come from this powerful nation. We'll come into environments. We think that because people do speak English, we also believe, well, they're relating just like we are, and we forget the fact that this is their second, third, fourth language. And so while we're doing business in this language because of history or culture, et cetera, the past, it's still something that we have to dive into the nuances of and really spend the time on the ground with people, going into their homes, going into their environments to fully understand how they think, what they appreciate, what they value, things that we may completely not value. And I say that because, as an American, because I came to appreciate the myriad of things that I believe now that we're actually wrong about. And how we do it is a lot of ways all wrong. Because we come from a power position, we're usually able to do that. But living in an environment like this and doing business across the continent, you realize that there are literally hundreds of nuances that take time. And many of them will get wrong. But yes, you have to take the time to immerse yourself, humble ourselves, and spend time with people in the communities where we're working in order to get things done. And that if we can do that, things can go a lot smoother. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Let's give our panelists a hand. Before I throw it out to the audience, I need to give another personal story. So I'm in Mozambique, studying for my dissertation, and I happened to, someone made a great connection to put me with a Mozambican who was really gonna take me all around and really help me get into the culture, right? So the way he did this is that he and his buddies every Friday night would get together around some good chicken and some beer. And they would just talk. Now, I speak pretty good Portuguese, but I'm not proficient. Well, close to being proficient, let me just say that. So we were sitting around talking, and they called me a name. I didn't know what they were calling me. And I asked my guy, I said, what did they just call me? He said, oh, don't pay any attention to them. I said, no, tell me, what did they just call me? He said, don't worry about that, Wheeler. I said, come on, tell me, what did they call me? He said, they called you white man.
Lungu.
He said, they called me white man. Really? Did I miss something this morning? I said, why do they call me white man? I'm a black man. I'm just like them. They said, no. You're black, but your culture is the culture of white American. You are closer to a white man to them than you are to a black man. Now, I had to wrestle with that. It hurt my heart. I thought I was black. Now I was coming back to my brothers. They calling me white man. But I had to wrestle with this thing about culture. I was speaking Portuguese too. They still saw me as white man. So we cannot escape our I mean, it is what it is. I mean, it is what it is. I was raised in America. I inculcate the culture of America, which they relate to as a white culture. Whether I'm black or not, they relate to it as white culture, so they called me white man. And that's how they saw me. No. Every time I was like, whoa, white man. I told my family, it's like, they called you what? So we cannot, just because we speak the same language, just because we look the same, we cannot assume that we are exactly the same and that we don't need to understand them and that we may have cultural biases that could prohibit doing business and getting closer. And actually, once I understood that, I actually got closer to them. So I said, well, tell me, why do you guys call me white man? And then they explained to me, well, this is why we call you white man. Yeah, we know you black as night, but we call him white man. So that actually brought us closer together when I was able to understand. And I wish, does anybody here speak Portuguese? Can tell me, I can't remember, what was the slang? What did they, you know the slang for white man in Portuguese, in Mozambique? No, it wasn't branco. They said branco. I know what branco is. No, in Portuguese. It was a slang. It was a slang. It might have been a swear word. I don't even know. He translated to me as white man. They may have called me something, blah, 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 blah. He translated to white man. That was enough being a swear word to me. So anyway, you know, I force myself when I go to a different culture to at least get 2 words that says, okay, I know I might look like you. Okay, I know I might even speak the same language, but I wanna understand you a little bit better. So I wanna say at least hello, and I wanna be able to say thank you. So with that, let me open it up to you. We have a little time. And if those, I don't know where the person is gonna carry the microphone, if you could raise your hand, introduce yourself, and ask your question or make a comment.
While they are getting a microphone, they may have called you a white man because when we eat traditional food, cow feet or sheep feet and all that, we use our hands. And perhaps you used a fork and knife.
Oh yeah, I was using the fork and knife. Yeah. But you know, I learned to put the fork and knife down. I mean, okay. Before, let me ask, any other responses from any of the other panelists before we go to the guests, the audience? And I'll start with you, Phil.
Well, I think the appreciation of culture and language diversity underscore the importance of reaching out to people and ensuring that you find resonance. Even though there is diversity, there's difference, but because you have an appreciation of that diversity, you know that we are not the same, but we have same goals, and we are trying to work towards the same goal. That appreciation really imbues the people you are with that sense of being received, being welcomed, and it's reciprocal.
Thank you. Marlon?
Yeah, I think for me, the reference to Ubuntu is powerful because people often ask me, so you studied in the US, why did you return? And I think it's that spirit of Ubuntu that brought me back home. Because that has been very difficult for me to explain. Yeah, there's family and there's friends and there's this and that, but I think it's that spirit of Ubuntu that you miss the most, no matter where you travel. That's what always attracts people to not only South Africa, but to Africa.
Yeah, I would say, I would just say I was in Morocco for the U.S. Africa Business Summit a few months ago, at the UN for UN General Assembly a few weeks back, and then to see an organization like this, an event like this, I think it's wonderful because I really noticed it in Morocco, and I also at the UN, and I see that it's just wonderful that Americans, that U.S. companies are more deliberate about Africa, and in order to be successful in Africa, are realizing through being deliberate what it takes to actually get business done in Africa. And I think the intention is higher than I've ever seen it in my 20 plus years on the continent. And I just think I think it's the beginning in a way of change. And I think that it could lead to something that's really powerful and wonderful from a U.S. and Africa perspective.
Thank you. So let's go with our audience.
Thank you so much. My name is Mutono. I will do a full introduction on that side. Mine's just a comment. Oh, I'll start with an observation, and I'll make an assertion and ask a question to the panel. So, Prof. Winstead talks about Ngugi wa Thiong'o and his work on language. The same author has written eloquently an essay about decolonizing the mind and basing it on language. Why do I bring this up? The initiative that we're doing here has different connotations, and I'm glad language has come up. We've got this thing, and here's my observation, called Test of English as a foreign language. Yes. 11,000 universities all over the world require this of African applicants to universities out of this continent. It costs $185 to see it. At the same time, it's been going on since 1954 as a requirement. You wonder, why is it so, yet this language actually belongs to Africa? And why do I say this? This is my assertion. There are more speakers of English in the whole world in Africa than anywhere else. The numbers speak for themselves. So if we're the majority, then we actually own the language. We shouldn't be tested at a great cost, because doing so is economic quarantine. It's what goes on when we give small things to fester 70 years later on. So what are we solving? What are we deconstructing? Should language continue being a tool for putting others down or others up? Should be something used for conflict? Should be something used to dispossess some? So I would love to, as we have this kind of discussions, to deconstruct some of these small things that are actually preposterous. And then, that the panel here, has this thing come across your radar? Do you see this as an issue? Thank you so much.
Let's take 2 questions, and then we'll ask our panelists to respond.
Good afternoon. 2 questions. We're in a business school. To what extent is cultural understanding linked to trust, which is integral in understanding power? So please talk about culture and trust. And I have to put you on the spot. How do you think your panel would be different if there was a woman on it in discussing culture?
I'll take the second question. Would you like to come join us? Thank you. I think it's going to become different. And I think that I don't think it was intentional, but it happens. You know, I think it reminds me of a question when I was in Zambia. I went there for a conference, and at the end of the conference, they had this question: who should put forward the academic agenda for Africans? I was thinking, is this a rhetorical question? We're in Africa. It's like, and so I was on the panel to respond. I said, I'm not sure how to answer that question, but let me rephrase the question, and I think you'll understand my quandary. I said, it's sort of like me hearing who should put the agenda for women? Men? But there was a real question that they didn't understand that the answer is simple: Africans. Africans should put forward the agenda, the academic agenda for Africa. But the fact that for years Africans did not put that, Africans were not the academics in America who were leading and a part of the African Studies Association. They were led by white Americans. Now, that has changed. That has changed. But if you knew the history of the African Studies Association, of which I'm part of, for most of their period, they were not led by either African Americans or Africans. It was really understood and believed that, oh, we know Africa. We don't need Africans to tell us about Africans. We study Africans all the time. And so there was an academic arrogance. Unfortunately, and I think it probably still exists, that we know Africa. We don't need Africans to help us study Africa. And I think it is now that African scholars are the ones that are dealing with this, that we know, hey, I don't know Africa as I thought I knew Africa. So thank you for joining us, Joyce. But let's take, I'm sorry.
Hello? Is it on? This is working, okay. So I sit here as a placeholder because much as we all know that Africa is a continent and not monolithic in its people, one woman does not hold space for all women. I said yes because from my upbringing across cultures, I am empowered to say yes and deal with the consequences of that yes. And know that that empowerment includes not just being decoration. So now that I've said yes and I'm here, I look forward to fully participating.
Great. And I have, in defense of, I didn't invite you as a placeholder, but in defense of my colleague, there were at least one or two women that were invited to be here and couldn't come. So it was not intended to look this way. It happened that those who were invited were not able to participate. So in defense of my colleague, Mr. Babukasa, so that is the appropriate response. I didn't want to think that was not thought about. But there was another question about language, and then let's take a couple more. Okay, let's get back there, and then I'd like my panel to respond to his comment about language, and maybe let's take two more.
Shouldn't we answer the question?
About trust. I asked about
about trust. Oh, okay. Why don't we take two more questions, and we'll have our panelists respond to the issue of competency and trust, and the other questions.
Thank you. I just want to check out if the body gestures, kinesics, how important are they to promote the businesses? In saying that, in UK, they have some other certain ways of behavior. For instance, if you are sitting next to a woman, then you close your legs, it means something. Then it might spoil the whole party, even if it's a job interview. Already you have disqualified for that. Then can you attest that in terms of anthropology? What role does it play in terms of conveying the cultures of that particular nation?
Okay,
Thank
let's
you.
take
I'm
one
Skhumbo
more, and then
Jebe.
now we'll have our panel respond. Let's start with the gentleman over there. He had his hand up, and then we have two people here. After this gentleman, we'll respond. And Joyce, I might really ask you to answer your own question.
All right. Okay. So like well, when I wrote my SATs a few years back, I'd actually learned quite a bit about the history of the United States, the different tribes that made up the indigenous peoples of the United States, like the Navajo, the Chesapeake nations, and so I'm just bringing this up in connection with the fact that African businesses have an interest in actually conducting business in the United States. So with regard to this issue of culture and language, how important is it for African companies to also familiarize themselves with the Native American cultures before they actually contemplate doing business there? And yeah, I would like to find out more on that.
Sure. Let's see if we can answer some of the questions. This issue, and see if I get this right. Should language be even an issue? And I want to make sure I say it correctly. I think the idea is that there are more English speakers in Africa than in England and the U.S., probably combined. Well, not probably. So the issue is, should language be a tool, or I'm not sure your comment or question you want us to respond to.
Yeah, what I'm saying is that African countries that have English as a official language have it all the way to high school. So the requirement of that test is totally not required at all. It's one of the things that we need to deconstruct, actually. Yeah, because it sounds like it's part of the economic quarantine that we face in this continent.
Okay, any panelists you want to respond to that?
I could deal with the aspect of that question, because the other aspect of it should be left to those who are testing people for English. I don't agree with it at all, particularly if you come from an English-speaking country. So I think that suffices. Let me deal with the aspect of the deconstruction of colonial thinking, particularly around language. And I think South Africa has done fairly well because of its cultural and language diversities. You have now in the business community acceptable ways of communication, which a way of communication which does not prescribe Oxford English, but which really takes it as acceptable if you are communicating something that can be understood. And this relates to one, pronunciation. I don't think it is a primary consideration as long as you are understood. And also the strict usage of authentic, if I may say, English words. The advertising industry, for example, in South Africa has led the way in bringing in other languages or other parlances into the communication stream to really come up with a new language of business. In South Africa today, it's acceptable when you say, this product is lekker. And lekker is not English, it's Afrikaans. But that is a way of deconstructing colonial English. In South Africa today, it is acceptable to say, welcome to Mzansi. And Mzansi is the South in Zulu. And you can actually even write about it in an essay. And I don't think you'll be penalized for saying Mzansi is a beautiful and lekker country to live in. It's South African. In fact, it's a norm to talk of what we call South African English. When 2-3 decades, there wouldn't have been anything like South African English, but we have developed our own. The same way as the Americans have done. There's nothing like American English, strictly speaking. English is English, but the Americans led the way. And I think South Africans have done very well. Nigeria, they've got pidgin English, and it's accepted. So this is one very positive attempt at deconstructing colonial thinking to language. And that has actually even normalized the power relations, because language can be used as a tool. Because you have gone far with your academic studies and acquired very high levels of proficiency in a language, you use it as a tool to oppress or look down upon those who have very less mastery of the language. So to bridge that gap or to bring about, to address that imbalance, we have had these very positive developments in Africa where we say, no, your Oxford English must meet me somewhere. And that somewhere is South African English. And who cares if I say it's lekker? It is lekker. And that's deconstruction, in my view. And then the last part I wanted to deal with so that my fellow panelists can handle other questions. It's the question of trust. Trust is earned over time. And in business, this is where, in fact, you have a practical experience of that. We don't meet for the first time and I say, oh no, man, Malin, I trust you. It is earned over time. The Chinese, for example, and it also has that cultural nuance. The Chinese, before they sit down in a boardroom with you to discuss business, they take you out to a golf course. And mind you, you have flown from here to Beijing for a big deal. But day one, you play golf. Day two, you play golf. And you say, no, but these guys are not taking me seriously. Day three, you play golf. And on day four, you have to fly back. And you are worried about the deal. You have come here to, and it's a multi-billion rand deal. On the last day, they say, the CEO and president of the company will meet you in the boardroom at 10 o'clock. In those 3 days, they were playing golf with you. They've checked everything they wanted to check about you. And they've ticked all the boxes without asking you any question. They've checked your punctuality. They've checked your mannerisms. They have checked your,
honesty.
Everything they've checked you. If they say tee off is at 10 and you arrive at 10:15, already you have failed the test. So by day 3, when you have failed so much, you just go to the boardroom to say, listen, the deal is off.
Or if you kick the ball.
Yeah.
Or if you count less strokes when you're making your score.
Yeah.
Cheating or... Hey.
So it's trust. Now, in our South African culture, that would translate to the meeting you will have on day one of that business discussion. One, we check time again. South African business environment is very strict about time. Some other, and it's not continental. There are parts of Africa where we say we are going to meet at 10, and the people rock up at 3, and they say, have you had a good breakfast? And it's 3 o'clock already. I couldn't even go and have my lunch because I'm waiting for this meeting, which should have been at 10. So what I'm saying is, when we meet at 10, I'm impressed with your time management. I am impressed with your dress code. I'm impressed with your demeanor. I'm impressed with the way you engage me. It has a level of respect that you display and which must be reciprocal. And so that's when trust is earned. And of course, it may not be the full complement of trust on day one, but already the seed is planted for trust. So trust is a process, and it is earned with time. So I think these things are very, very important in appreciating and embedding culture and language in how we conduct business.
And with that, I have to close the session because as you said, South Africans businesses are really strict on time, and I was given this note that I was supposed to end about 4 minutes ago. So I have to just say thank you all. I know there are more questions and more comments to be made. We had anticipated that that's exactly what we would create, would be a hunger to do it again, to be a hunger to have it a deeper, more complex, more thorough discussion, and I think we've accomplished our goal. Thank you all for coming, and thank you, panelists, for being able to participate.
Very nice to meet you. My pleasure. Great to meet you.
Thank you, bro.
Hey.
You said about the white man? It's kind of fun. Anyway, so we have Paul Clyde, Gene Wells, Clap Beswick, Alan Mutono, and Bob. So you'll be here. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We're about to start. Put it in your pocket, then.
that. Okay, you can hear me. Can they hear me? They can hear me, yeah.
No, no.
Launching the corporate ambassadorship and case study project. Uh, the US Business in Africa Awards initiative has several components. Last night, we witnessed one dimension of it, which is celebrating excellence and recognizing US businesses that are based in the continent that are giving back to their communities through different forms of social investments. 7 such awards were given to 6 companies, and these were the first of their kind in terms of the work that the US-based companies in Africa are actually doing. We hope to celebrate more next year and in the years to come. As you heard from the Chief Judge's report last night, there's new data that is emerging, both from the winning companies, but also from those companies that did not win. The question is, how do we use this data going forward? Use this data to build ambassadors from the corporate world, but also build case studies that will be used in business schools, but also by companies themselves. What happens from tomorrow till new winners are selected? There's a whole year that we want to utilize to engage companies that won, but also equally so those that might not have won, but are offering us insights and lessons of what not to do. And therefore, a lot of initiatives that are planned will include roadshows, they will include communication and dissemination of good stories and practice, as well as rigorous debate as we are having in this conference, but also teaching, research, internships, guest speaking by industry captains, as well as thinking about exchange programs that students from Africa and from the US can actually engage in. And so as part of that launch and part of the thinking about the case studies, we are joined now in this session by a number of panelists. So I'm going to start with Dr. Paul Clyde and share the vision of this project in terms of how you are concerned as an individual, but also as the school.
Okay, thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity. So, again, I'm from the William Davidson Institute, and one of the roles we have within the University of Michigan's Business School is we are the case publishing unit there. Many of the cases we publish are based on companies in the US and therefore our MBA program. But we also have a significant number of cases on businesses in low and middle income countries. And for that reason, Harvard now distributes our cases because it was a gap they didn't have. And I will comment on one element of that I think is important. Part of the work we've done, we worked with a school in Senegal to develop a supply chain program and wrote some case studies jointly with the faculty there so that they had case studies. Up until then, they have been using case studies that were based on Europe and the United States. And then they had case studies that were based on what was going on in Senegal and written by the Senegalese faculty. So that, to illustrate the concepts that were being laid out there. And along those lines, I think this part of what this program is doing is going to be really important because the idea behind it is to sort of, as I understand it, from discussions we've had over the past couple of years, is to convey the idea that there are real business opportunities for core businesses in Africa, and that those business opportunities can be realized by this being with American, U.S. companies, by U.S. companies. And so the awards present us some examples of what worked, what didn't work, and how that worked. And it's I think a great opportunity to start developing a library of such stories that can be used in the U.S. and in Africa. And as part of that, in the discussion that we had as a group earlier, we're going to have one organization drive the writing of the case study, but no matter which organization it is, there will be a partner institution on the other side of the ocean that's working on that case study too. So it's coming from both perspectives. So I think I'll leave that.
Right. Thank you so much, Paul. Let's go to Professor Wells. Howard University is also part of this initiative. What's the vision from your end?
Well, we currently have a partnership with Wits University. We're part of the Global Trilateral MBA program. So it's Howard University, Wits University, and a school in China. And the plan is for our students to come here during March, and for the students from here to come to the US in the fall. That is in September, October, but because of COVID, that was put on ice for a while. And what the program does is the students work in consultant projects, and the plan is to enrich the program by having these cases embedded in the program also. Now, based on the last session that we just had, I think we'll have to rethink how we write these cases to take into account the cultural and the language competency, especially if we're writing the cases about the US and the African institutions. So that definitely is food for thought as we develop the cases.
Great. And then I know you've been leading the work of writing cases for the business school here. And so there's already a laid out process that you follow, and it might respond to some of the issues that arose in the earlier conversation. Again, from your end, I know you've been talking to the colleagues about how this is going to unfold. Maybe you could share with us some of those insights.
So are you looking for me to share with you a little bit about our process of how we write the cases? Yeah. Okay, so we write a specific form of case, sort of a Harvard Business School type teaching case. But these can also be, we could always also write them as sort of a more of a lessons learned kind of case. But at the outset, we try and understand what is it that we want to achieve from the teaching of this case. What are the learning outcomes in a classroom environment? And from then, we map the content of the case onto that. I think what is going to be really fascinating from the WBS perspective for this project is that we don't have a lot of cases of US investing in Africa or foreigners investing in our country. We have cases where we've got South African companies investing in the rest of the world, and not many of those, I have to say. So for us, it's going to be really, really useful to have sort of increase our portfolio of cases, and I think to increase the portfolio of cases in general, which are looking at US companies investing in Africa. And we will do it using that process of identifying what the learning objectives there will be. We would work with faculty members who want to teach the cases or use the cases in their classrooms. And I don't know if that answers all your questions, if that's enough.
If you still have something
no,
to
I
say,
have
then
nothing.
you can still go ahead.
What I think is useful, we've done some work with Becky in this for CAPSI. There was not a lot of research and case studies written on philanthropic organizations in Africa, and through his efforts working with us, we've produced quite a few cases in that arena, and I think it's increased the body of knowledge. And I think that these cases that we're doing for this project will increase the body of knowledge in this particular area, the same way we've done with you.
Great, thank you so much. We'll come back to the issue of case studies and how maybe they are going to be done in collaboration across the Atlantic, but also how they are going to be utilized. So for us currently at the business school, case studies are mainly for teaching.
Yeah.
And I suspect that an audience like this would actually want them beyond the classroom, so that they also inform policymakers as well as the behavior of companies. So something to think about in terms of the dissemination of those case studies. I would have come to you, Bob, now, but I think I'll come at the end. So let me come to you, Alan Mutomo. The idea of corporate ambassadorship will include activities such as golf tournaments and others. And I know that you represent an engagement initiative on golf. What's the vision in terms of the relationship with this initiative that we have started here?
Okay. Thank you so much, Prof. I'll just paint the vision in a few words or a couple of paragraphs. First of all, I want to say we already have, we have a golf tournament as an extension of the corporate ambassadorship program of doing well by doing good by using the principle of gamification. But so far, I'm so happy that we already have 2 members who are going to play golf, Dr. Chacho there and Prof. Morithi. You don't have to go to China for 4 days. You only have only 1 day, on the 2nd of December. Yeah, and we'll test you within 5 hours. Yeah, and the whole idea is that, and here is I go in my discourse. A university is about building knowledge, and true knowledge is that which inspires good practice. There are many ways in which you can establish good practice, but I will offer just 3, which I will speak through. One is connect, and then explore and engage. So as we go through what the center is institutionalizing in terms of embedding good practices from America, so we can also use them here to better or to prosper, we're looking at having opportunities to engage in a respectable way, in an interesting way, to explore each other out of these boredoms, to go into spaces where we can speak about things, not in terms of infrastructure, it's all important, don't mistake me, or trade agreements, or language or culture, but into an open field where we can still get to know each other. We don't need 4 days like the Chinese, but that's besides the point. What we're looking at is to, the Prof. Beginkosi has mentioned that we need resources to ensure that the awards happen every year. The center is financially sustainable, to have platforms where we can bring together participants who are sponsors, golf players, volunteers, golf fans, so that we can be able to extend or manifest the good work being done by the companies that we've organized here and the 600 others who didn't make it here to be able to come in and participate and sponsor. So this golf tournament is a good feel. It's an extension of what we're doing, but we really need your support. And the whole idea is that we acknowledge that America is a great sporting country. They've done so much on various sports codes. In the area of golf, they've managed that sport so successfully that we need to learn something from that. What we're talking about is we want to see the forest for the woods, okay? So that we also get inspired and find the tiger within all of us. So besides playing golf, I also have a trade. I'm a philosopher, for your good information, and my domain, I'm a doctor of technology innovation. So my day job when I'm not playing golf, when I'm bored from playing golf, I'm tired of using my balls, I actually design frameworks that are used by organizations to scale their business goals. I'm very good at my work, and that's why I was invited by the center to lead this effort. That compliment was given to me by my 7-year-old son, who was in McDonald's actually when he said it. So I'm surrounded by Americans somehow, one way or the other. But the whole idea is to be able to extend ourselves, to benefit in this manner. Companies that sponsor the golf tournament have an opportunity to showcase their product or their services at the different halls which need to be sponsored by each company. It's an expensive function, and the intention is to raise funds that further the work of the center, to raise funds that support the awards on an ongoing basis, to have a spectrum of events going on beyond golfing into discourses on culture, symposiums, publications, and so forth. That is the vision.
Thank you so much. So for those that cannot see that far, this is happening on the 2nd of December this year. It's a Friday at 11:30 a.m. Bookings and sponsorships, please contact Prince Mutau, prince.mutau@vest.ac.za. And I think Prince is somewhere around here if he can show himself. If not, I think you should be outside. So Bob, yesterday at the board meeting, we talked a lot about this, but also included the issue of STEAM, which includes the arts, the creatives, in thinking about business inclusiveness. I know that apart from being a central member of the initiative, you are also a communications specialist. From your own end, what are the next steps going forward in terms of taking this initiative forward, but more in particular, the utilization, the development, and the writing of case studies and some of these initiatives that we talked about, like the golf and others?
Thank you, Professor Moyo. And I think the term or the phrase corporate ambassadorship has come up quite a bit yesterday, today, and so forth. It's a fairly new concept. I will not want to bore you too much with the conceptual understanding of it. But in a nutshell, it is the understanding that businesses, companies, now play diplomatic roles, just as states. In fact, sometimes referred to as public diplomacy and so forth. So companies almost take on individual diplomatic roles. And so it's under that kind of conceptualization that we are rolling out immediately the corporate ambassadorship, or if you wish, the corporate diplomacy aspect of it, of the entire initiative. And this is in a couple of ways. One is that we're going to undertake a series of public engagement activities, not just for the businesses that win, because these businesses will be shining, will be holding the awards for a year-long period, during which they will be celebrating their winning of the awards. We want them to display the trophies in their front desks. We want to see those trophies on the front page of their websites. We are going to do so on our website or our portal as well. Again, we have developed some very good relations with some leading media organizations, and we're expanding that. We will undertake video productions on the winning businesses, as well as the partners, and there are quite a few partners here if you look at that banner there. And so there will be an engagement through journalistic productions, both print, digital, and media, and video for that matter. And so we urge you to look forward for those. The second area of engagement is indeed public engagement, such as this. We are going to invite some of our board members. I believe you had very eloquent speakers who are on our board, including our moderator. As you can see, is very eloquent. Our co-chair, Mima, is very well versed. He's got lots of experience. Michael Sudakasa is here. And there's a long story of how we started this initiative with him. He's equally very, not only eloquent, but has lots of depth of understanding of this. So we are going to convene a number of public lectures here at Wits, in the US with institutions such as Howard and William David Stone, in other universities across the continent, to just spread the message of Africa-US trade and investment relations. At the same time, we're going to offer both our governing board members, our partners, and winning businesses an opportunity to offer guest lectureship at schools of business. That's going into class. If a lecturer has a course unit, he invites any one of these guests to come in and do that, lecture. And that's really part of the entire process. Along the training aspects of it as well, and this is a matter that was that was presented to us by the governing board, is that we are going to provide opportunities for internships by students. So students intern at the winning businesses to get hands-on practical skills. And in that way, then they can go into the labor market much more prepared than having just abstract classroom knowledge. In this respect, in fact, tied to the internship project is an exchange program that actually also then includes staff, that's faculty, or, talking of language, in the US we call them faculty, on the continent we call them lecturers, but exchange of lecturers since we are here on the continent, between on the continent and also in the US, so that we can learn from each other. I think the Howard relationship with Wits is a good example of that. I think one of the ideas that has also come in very strongly is that these businesses, as corporate ambassadors, also serve as role models. Role models in the sense that they can be showcased to other smaller businesses that are entrepreneurships that are trying to come up. The whole issue of ESG has come up, and it's a very difficult arena for entrepreneurs or small businesses. So that will be another, component for the corporate ambassadorship, side of things. I think I'll stop, moderator, here so that we can have a discussion. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Bob. Let me just check if any one of you wants to add anything, because I want us to use the remaining minutes just to get our delegates to also assist us in crafting this project so that we strengthen some of the elements that we might have missed. One of the things that our students struggle with when they are applying for ethics, for example, is getting permission letters from companies. And last night, one of the companies that won is actually being studied by one of my students. And so I went up to the lady and said, one of my students actually studying your sustainability program, and immediately realized that he was talking to somebody completely different from the person who came last night. But already we have established that now the two of them can now go back and begin to even get more data. The data that was entered into this competition is actually the data that the student wanted. And so there's so many ways in which this initiative is actually opening opportunities, not just for the companies, but also for the students as well. So let me just come back to the audience and see if there's anyone that wants to add. If you can ask questions, but the idea really is to try and strengthen the project. So let's have a mic there, a second, and then co-chair. Okay, and then we'll go to so there are four now, if we could, and then we'll come to you.
Yeah, just a quick first thank you all for your comments. And I'm just very happy to be a part of this whole process. Thank you all for inviting me. But I was thinking just one of the problems with the information getting to the people who need it the most, having understood case studies and studied in my own MBA program, the challenge with the case studies is that the language of the case study is often at a language that small and medium businesses can't digest. The larger companies, they can digest that. But if the goal is to really grow businesses, is it possible that once these case studies are done, that they can be modified some into a form that smaller and medium businesses can at least get the lessons learned, and then this information being made available to the Chamber of Commerce's. So just about all U.S. businesses are part of their Chamber of Commerce. So if the Chamber of Commerce is not just the universities, the chambers get the information about these case studies, then the smaller businesses are most likely to get them because they usually don't have relationships with the universities. So my question is, can you make something also digestible and readily available to these smaller businesses and also connect with the chambers?
Great. Just hold on until we get all the questions. I think there was, okay, maybe we can start here. There was a hand here, 2 hands here, then we can go up.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. My name is Charles Makunja. I'm from UNDP in Lesotho. I don't have a question, but just kind of just observation.
There is a
observation or on what you've said, and just to highlight that I think this is what the center has done is the best example of applying the triple helix model, where you have the government, the private, the business, and the government linking together. And I look at this as a very important platform that will assist in developing new products, showing the linkages between the academic and the business community, but also seeing opportunities for developing funding and strategic demands, especially between the academics and the governments and the business community, but also the question of job creation and infrastructure. So I'm very encouraged at the initiative that the center has taken, and I see a lot of opportunities for coming together. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the gentleman just behind you.
Thank you, sir. My name is Septi Bugola. I'm quite involved in the tourism space. I serve on the board of the Tourism Business Council of South Africa, but my longer background is in public policy for economic development. Just 2 points to make. One is that over the years, as I say, I've worked extensively in policy. One of the key challenges that we experience is the lack of trust and collaboration between business and government. And as I was listening to you mapping out your thinking and intentions about these policies, it could fall, I assume, Bob, in your public diplomacy focus, but I did not hear an explicit articulation of an intention to use these cases that you're going to be documenting and the lessons you glean from them to influence public policy. And I think there's a gap there. And there's a lot of, even in tourism, I think actually that's a pronounced case. So I would like to hear whether that is intention. Maybe it's part of your corporate diplomacy. And just touching on the question that was asked about, or the mention of chambers. Years back when I worked at this institution, we used to have a center for entrepreneurship across there. Well, it was a center for developing business, and I worked there. And in fact, I think it was that center that pioneered the writing of cases here, because we used to write cases on small business and teach them at the center, but we used to use the same cases to draw out very clear policy lessons and engage with government on the policies, on the policy lessons that were coming out. So that center used to play a key role actually in informing, government policy on entrepreneurship and small business development using those cases. And we used to have a program that we used to do with an organization, a US organization called SIPE, Center for International Private Enterprise, which is really a leading organization in developing the capacities and capabilities of chambers around the world. And that program was to develop, the managerial capabilities of local chambers. And I think that, as a person who works in the public space, in the public policy space and business, there really is a huge gap in terms of, educational programs for chamber leadership. And chambers play a central role in economic and business life. And I wonder if business schools like this one see a possibility in looking at that from a capacity building point of view as well.
Great.
Thank you, sir.
Let's go to Mia up there.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Not to turn this into a board discussion, but a couple of things occurred to me is very important in this presentation. One, in the corporate ambassadorship or diplomacy, I think the underlying thing will obviously be the public policy. I mean, that's the basic underlying reason. But I think I want to make sure that as we're creating the opportunities for the speaking engagements for the corporate ambassadors, that it's being done on the continent as well as in the U.S. Because one of the things that's very important for U.S. business to hear is from U.S. businesses operating here and perhaps their African counterparts, that there's real things going on. So I want to make sure we're doing that. The other part to our golf gentlemen, next year, the golf tournament must be attached directly to the actual awards. So the very next day, we don't do tourism, we do the golf tournament. And that's a fantastic way to raise funds. I tell you, we did it in Marrakesh for the CCA Summit, and it was a big winner. So just a suggestion in the golf tournament, incorporate it into this. We already have the dates, October 26th, 27th? Golf tournament is October 28th. Over.
Okay, I think there was a hand up there. I hope I haven't missed anyone. There's one there, Senyu.
All right, thank you. My name is Senyo Kujo, and I've read business school and also a research associate at the African Center for the Study of United States. So I have two things. One is just in addition to what Dr. Wakesa said, and the second one is more of an appeal relating to what Professor Becky said. So at the center, we also have a research working group on US and African trade and economics. And one of the challenges that we face, which will lead to a second appeal relating to data, is we do not really have a database where we can access data for our research publications. Relating to what Professor Becky just said, that one of the students actually was working on a case study, and one of the companies that entered the competition was what the student was working on, and that helped the student to be able to get data to do the case study. Because some of these policies are data-driven, and when we have databases where we can access data and be able to do these analytics, it helps for the students in their case studies and also to influence policy. So probably from the center perspective and the other collaborators, if this can be looked at so that we can have a database where research and publication at the center, and for those who are interested can easily have access to data and be able to channel some papers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let me just be sure that I didn't miss anyone who had raised their hand before. So there's one last question here from Jacob, and then we'll come back to the panelists.
Thank you, moderator. Mine relates somewhat to the issues raised by the two gentlemen over there. Last evening, we saw representatives of the U.S. government in the session. I may have missed some of our local representatives in government this morning, but I'm not too sure whether I saw any in last evening's session. And so my suggestion would be that the center and the initiative also probably also needs to engage our local or national governments in some of these initiatives. I would imagine that this being a very Pan-African initiative, I would have loved to see high commissioners and ambassadors in conversations like this. I know we're in the knowledge business, as a university, but I think this is more than just generating knowledge. So maybe you've done it, and those might be lessons that we could also learn in terms of the type of engagement that is happening. Thank you.
This is just a quick question and request. If when the case studies are done, there is at least some sort of normalization of the data so that there can be comparison and analysis. I know we talked about we can all do it our own way, but if I wanted to compare across companies, then it would be very helpful if there was at least a model so that we could do cross-company analysis, and also those seeking to do research could also do cross-company analysis, and that when we come up with this model, that it be held, that model be sustained throughout the each year.
We have actually exhausted our time, but it's only fair.
There's a question up there.
Oh, okay.
And there's one at the top.
Thank you. We cannot just compare data. We also have to compare accounting policies. In the person of our representative from Howard University, we have a CPA that understands the difference between what the US policy on accounting is and what the rest of the world lives by. And so I think it's really important to keep an eye out for this ISSB thing that I mentioned and point out whether or not the US signs up for ISSB. The last time the US accounting profession kept with GAAP and the rest of the world took on accounting for, I believe it's for depreciation and a few other things differently. Why is that important? Because we're talking about how do we compare apples to apples, mangoes to mangoes, passion fruit to passion fruit, okay? So we have the expertise. Let's be mindful of it intentionally.
Right, so let's come back to your colleague. Just pick any of the questions that you're comfortable with, and maybe we start with the golf one.
Okay. Awesome. Was there a golf question? I think it was just a suggestion that we should do it one day and that we put in the planning. Yeah. But maybe I can also speak about data. We do have a form of data in that most research is actually a greenfield expedition that we do within the continent. We don't necessarily have agencies that collect data deliberately for research purpose. When they do, it's for management purposes, either a private company or government, and accessing it is nigh impossible. However, we have agencies within South Africa that actually collect data for commercialization, and they make it available at a very high cost. It's really a problem for all of us researchers to be able to attain the normalization to really compare across geographies. Structured data is very expensive to find. Yeah, that's my contribution to that. It's an opportunity, actually. Howard, guys give us some American dollars, we go out and get data. Yeah.
Okay, let's take it from there.
So I'll just respond to Joyce's comment. Yes, the U.S. has been very resistant to conforming to the international accounting standards. The U.S. is clinging to U.S. GAAP. So as a result, there has to be some deeper analysis, even when it comes to looking at the financials, that needs to be done. So thank you, Joyce, for pointing that out, and that will be noted.
So a couple of comments were on the audience and tailoring it to specific. And I like the idea of doing it to the extent it doesn't apply to small, or the language somehow isn't accessible to small and medium-sized enterprises, or tailoring it to policy too. The cases that we write aren't policy, they're business, but there could be policy implications. And so to the extent there is an opportunity to do that, I like the idea of adjusting something down the road. It's a question of time and resources and things like that. As to standardizing the cases, my concern about that is each case, because it's a case, is about some very specific topic that often has nothing to do with another one. So for instance, I've written a case about organization of business relationships where I talk about contracting and their relationships. I don't have any financials in there at all. And there's another one I've written that's really all about financials and sort of the assessment of it. So the topics aren't comparable across. And my concern would be if we tried to do that, we'd lose. The point of the case is it's rich. Whereas if you have a data set, you've got 1,000 observations and you have the same variable all fine, you've got numbers there. The benefit of the case is not numbers, you don't have that. What you do have is really in-depth knowledge about some topic. What that topic is, I think, is an important question that has to be determined with each company and what the audience is. But I'm having a hard time seeing how we could standardize them across and make the cases useful at the same time.
I think Claire can pick it up from there because there was a question around how to make the cases digestible for even small and medium enterprises. So I think there was an assumption that the cases that we currently write are easily read and accessible by bigger companies and not small and medium companies.
Yes, sure. So I just wanted to echo what Paul said here about how the case information, trying to write a comparable information is very difficult. We tried it a little while ago with some cases on leadership, and it was a dog's dinner. And so I think it's business in Africa, yes, in Africa. We need to think of what are the final products going to be, and do we take the cases that we've written and then turn them into something different? How are they disseminated? The difficulty is going to be for writing for multiple audiences, because we write for business, for universities, and for university students. So now, it's not impossible to take those documents and turn them into something that are more accessible. That'll be another step in the process. Unless you don't want us to start off by writing for university students and postgrad university students at that, if we have the end goal properly in mind, then we can work back from that and write what's going to be suitable for the end goal, or we can end up producing two documents, because I reckon that you're right. You don't want to have something that gets stuck, and I say this, I don't mean it pejoratively, but gets stuck in a classroom. The influence that the cases can have in the classroom is widespread because those business people go out into the world. We know that. We're in academic institutions because of that. We want to influence the world through what we do here in the universities. So it won't get stuck here if they're good cases. It'll get out in the way people apply what they do. But if you want to make the content of those cases more accessible everywhere, we need to think of a different way of doing that.
Yeah. So I suppose also it might address one of the issues around whether or not these cases will be influencing policies as well. That while the case might be written for a classroom, we can actually use some of that and package it in ways that addresses different audiences.
Can I make one more point on that? So I think in some cases, the cases can be used for policy even if they're not intended that way. Very often the cases that I use in my class, I'm not paying attention to the teaching note the way it was intended by the case writer. There's something else I want to illustrate out of it, some other point that I want to make. And so I'll just have them read the case and I'll discuss it the way I want to. So I think very often, even without even trying, it may be that a case could be used for policy and also some point for the others. But I think it is also true that it's written for an MBA audience, and the faculty who's writing it has to have a reason they're doing it. So they've got a classroom that they're planning to use it in, and probably specific concepts from that classroom they're planning to use. So one thing you could do is just have an additional document that maybe explain those concepts too, so why you were using it.
And I wanted to say that in the last 2 or so years when we've been writing cases for philanthropy, because none existed whatsoever in the continent. And as we started writing them, we started getting requests by the various same institutions for the cases that we have written for them to use with their own constituencies. But one of the things that I did, and I think each lecturer can be creative about it, I set an exam for my students on one case study, and then I sent the same exam to the organization for them to also write the exam. And comparing the responses from the company and the responses from the students is something that really fascinated me in terms of how you can do that. So I think you can also be very creative in terms of how you use these case studies. So Bob, let's come to you. And there were issues around whether you are planning to have some capacity building for the chambers, but also whether the intention is really to create this awareness even with the government, which does not seem to feature in the road shows.
Right. First of all, on the involvement of public and, the government and public sector more broadly, I wish my colleague Enoch Sitole was sitting in my seat here, because it is to the various governments, including the government in this country, that we reached out extremely early in organizing the activities of last evening. And I'm very happy Phil is also here, he knows that story. I think we did our best from about May, June, and so forth, but it's something that we have not given up on. I think it's a matter of persuasion to try and get them on board. I think they will, perhaps after this, they will see the value of coming on board. Okay. And so I think we should watch this space for 2023. With regards to making this knowledge that we are producing not just pedantic and abstract and meaningful to SMMEs and the lower levels, I think my response will be that there are various intersections and interlinkages in this entire initiative. And I don't think there's one size fits all kind of component within the complex of ideas that we're having. Yes. So our first call to all colleagues is that this is an innovative and creative initiative. And we can see how corporates fit in, but also entrepreneurships and so forth fit in. I'm thinking, and I think we invite colleagues to think with us creatively in what can we do. I'm thinking, for instance, the case studies might be geared, or the audience might be mostly corporates and in the classrooms, students and faculty. But as a journalist myself, when I read a case or I read several of them, I can see some information that I can coax out of it and write a feature story for the Sunday Times, or develop a video production, or do a TV show. And therefore, from something that has been researched for 7 months as a case study, I find value that can then go. And I think we do all this as journalists. When a case study comes out and is very powerful, you see it being redacted or paraphrased or edited to fit a certain consumer base. I think in terms of, to the earlier point and to Septi's point, the advocacy element of this initiative, which we didn't touch on, is that the businesses that win also will have overcome certain bottlenecks, overcome certain challenges, some certain barriers. And therefore, we want, as part of the corporate ambassadorship project, to include them in the advocacy end of things, with the UN, with governments and so forth, to say, look, we won this award. This is how we overcame these challenges. This is how governments can facilitate us to do even better. And even those that fail might actually say, we failed because the taxation regime in South Africa is extremely difficult to follow, and so forth. I think those will be my responses. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think we will end it here. I think one of the things that we did not say, but is expected, is that companies that will then be studied also need to understand that the exercise is not just praising, like dishing praises to them, but it's really like going deeper into understanding what makes it work and what doesn't work, and that's meant to also allow students, but also constituencies to take lessons from that. I just don't want us to leave here with the view that the case studies will be praise songs for the companies. So on that note, can I invite all of us to thank our panelists, and then I will hand over to our facilitators. Thank you.